everybody. Just want to give a couple of announcements for some stuff that GHA has going on. We are a proud sponsor of the WAFA Awards of Excellence this year that will be held at NOCO 8 in Denver, Colorado. We are taking nominations for the awards through March 15th. So I posted some links in the chat. If you want to nominate your peers, please take a look at that, and we welcome your nominations and look forward to it. And the banquet dinner that we'll be having to present the awards will be on March 24th in Denver, Colorado at NOCO. Seating is limited, so if you want to get your tickets, I left a link in there to purchase those as well. So make sure you get them soon, because we are anticipating that they will sell out quickly. And another thing that we have going on with NOCO 8 is we're going to be giving away a tiny hemp home. We're going to have more details on that coming out soon. Really awesome opportunity. So follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletters if you're not already signed up, to keep up for the news coming out about that and latest updates. And as always, if you're interested in membership or would like to discuss your membership, feel free to reach out to me. I'll soon post my email address again in the chat, and then also a calendar if you want to schedule. And I appreciate those who have scheduled with me so far and look forward to every conversation. Oh.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joanne. You are a huge asset to Global Hemp Association. We appreciate you so much, as I know our members do as well. If you're joining today and you're not a member, and this is one of your first times joining, make sure you reach out to Joanne if you have questions. A lot of our information is available at globalhempassociation.org. You can also check out our social platform that has our media, all of our content, which is hemphallway.com, and really utilize the resources that we bring to the table. This is what we're here for. So without further ado, I would love to make a quick introduction to Tim and Nando with Hemp Connect. You guys are bringing us into the next level with carbon by introducing the software. So if you could please briefly introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a sneak peek about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, hopefully that's what we're going to do. Giving our best. So Hemp Connect, we founded actually on the World Cannabis Day last year on the 420 April in Hamburg, Germany. I'll just shortly introduce myself and then give the word to Tim. So I've been in the hemp industry for 3.5 years, maybe now, roughly, yes. Started off with CBD, and then of course discovered all the opportunities and the sustainability potential. Always had the desire to do something sustainable, entrepreneurship fortunately gives the freedom. So along the journey, I met Tim, who was involved in farming in Hamburg, around Hamburg, and we teamed up to bring hemp sustainability to the next level. And with that, I give the word to Tim.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, so I'm Tim. I'm the second half of Hemp Connect. Working in the hemp industry here in Germany for about 3 years, starting with farming operations, then met Nando, and then in the last year we had this shift to sustainability and carbon and all that area. Currently, I'm the one working a lot with biochar, pyrolysis, and the potential hemp brings to the table, and combining these negative technologies. And yeah, hopefully we can contribute something useful, something new to this meeting. And yeah, I'll give back over to Nando, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And Nando and Tim, what it's going to take for us to kind of step into the new era is an ability to track what we're doing, have hard data, and be able to take a look at that data after the fact, instead of just kind of taking one set of numbers and going with those. So I'm excited to hear about what potential opportunities we have here. We did have a handful more people jump on. So I just want to once again welcome everybody before we really jump into the good parts here. Global Hemp Association is a global networker. We bring people together. We're also are really moving things forward. We're funding some global seed trials that are going to, or national seed trials, my apologies, that are going to allow us to really start to understand the data and make progress that we've really been needing as an industry as a whole. So we really appreciate all of your support here at Global Hemp Association. And once again, we have amazing Tim and Nando here with us today talking about Hemp Connect. Without that, I'm gonna pass it back over to Nando.
Okay. So I've prepared some slides, of course, for this meeting here that I would just run through. A second. So I've prepared that in quite some detail. Not sure how detailed we need. If it's too long, we can skip. I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. But definitely trying to cover the full complexity of it. So let me quickly see this. Just sharing my screen. Maybe at that point, and just a side note on where we are at the moment with Hemp Connect. We received a grant from the City of Hamburg last year. Fortunately, it has been tough 10 months without a salary in the beginning. And 1 second, I am almost done here.
Awesome. And while you're getting that loaded, I just saw Ross pop up on my screen here. So I wanted to give a quick shout out. Westtown Bank and Trust, they're one of our sponsors. They're the reasons we can do interviews like this. They're the reason we can bring this knowledge, that we have the power to sit here and really make this possible. So thank you, Ross. Thank you, Westtown Bank and Trust. Anybody looking for some hemp banking and you're tired of having your bank account shut down, Ross is your guy to contact. He's helped a lot of us in the industry. All right, Nando, we got that ready to go?
Yes.
All right.
So sharing the screen. Okay. Once more, picking up where I just stopped. Received a grant from the City of Hamburg. That is the early stage startup funding. And yeah, fortunately, then Tim and I can now fully concentrate on all of this. And currently we're in the development stage of, well, I want to say the very fundament of what we then want to translate into software. And yeah, I'm currently reading a lot, having a lot of formulas in front of me every day, and Tim on the biochar side of it, more about that later. We've done some biochar tests I can show you, but there are also some photos in the presentation. Yeah. So it has been some time, to be honest, that I have had to present a long slide deck in such a meeting. Forgive me if I lose my point in between. But yeah, I'll just start over. There's four agenda points that I would go through. Let me just quickly make a timing next to that so that I also see how long I'm talking and I don't overstep. So life cycle assessment, I guess most of you guys have heard about it. I'm just quickly going to read out an official definition once more so that we're all aligned what we're actually talking about. So LCA is a structured, comprehensive, and internationally standardized method. It quantifies all relevant emissions and resources consumed and the related environmental and health impacts and resource depletion issues that are associated with the entire life cycle of any goods or services. Life cycle assessment is a vital and powerful decision support tool complementing other methods which are necessary to help effectively and efficiently make consumption and production more sustainable. And more sustainability is what we all want while we're here. So the important words that I read in this are those on the left, and on those examples, I'll go through this chapter of difficulties of LCA in agriculture. So structured is every LCA. This is the basic framework. In the bottom, you can see the source as well. This is taken from the JRC EU Commission. There's even a handbook about it, and it is based on the international standard. This is the pretty standard framework to conduct any LCA. You define a goal. According to that goal, you have a scope on which basis you collect an inventory. The inventory is usually the streams of emissions, the processes, also tiny parts used in any good put together, and in the end you assess the whole impact of that list. This can be done basically with Excel already, but of course there are also programs that do that. Some of those look nicer, some of them don't really, yeah, this is basically what you get if you go to any sustainability consulting and ask for an LCA. It's going to be according to this framework. The applications are, of course, marketing, public policy making, and importantly, strategic planning, which is also very relevant for carbon farming. This is just the process broken down. I'm not going to get into detail here, just so that you guys see the basic framework from the slide before. Is then broken down in many, many individual steps that require a lot of review. Critical review is what I highlighted in the bottom there, is what is subject to every LCA. We need to critically assess how these studies have been done and also question the result, which I'm also going to do later in the examples. Now, in terms of agriculture, the comprehensiveness of an LCA is quite the challenge. There are several greenhouse gases that are continuously being emitted in agricultural processes. For example, in the back, you can see the burning of crop residues, which is something nobody should really do. And that also emits methane. Cows emit a lot of methane too. Methane, for example, has an emission factor that is, I think, 25 times of CO2. So methane is actually a greenhouse gas that is much worse for global warming than CO2. Nitrous oxide, even much more worse than that. I think the factor goes above 200. Yeah, and many processes in agriculture are included in an LCA. So, for example, fertilizer, the process of using fertilizer on the field is depending on whether it's mineral fertilizer or organic fertilizer or manure slurry, is also due to the application of the fertilizer and the production. So in a comprehensive LCA, you go downstream and upstream and try to account for every associated emissions. Sometimes that scope is too intensive and also well, kind of makes it impractical. So breaking down the emissions of the maintenance of a tractor is, for example, a task that is quite difficult. And yeah, that's where it's a trade-off. The emission categories commonly applied in agriculture, global warming potential, eutrophication potential, acidification, the terrestrial ecotoxicity, and the energy use, of course. Global warming potential comprises all greenhouse gases that I also mentioned just a minute ago. Eutrophication, for example, is about sort of the overflow of macronutrients into aquatic and terrestrial systems. Let's say the nitrogen we put on the fields is not exactly natural, right? We give it into that ecosystem. So too good of something can also be damaging. Yeah, acidification and ecotoxicity. Feel free to Google that. I'm not going to bother you much longer with that definition. It is mostly about the entire life cycle, which is exactly in agriculture often not so easy because we're dealing with raw material extraction primarily, and going down the whole supply chain involves many, many different players in many supply chains, and in a globalized world that is not so easy. So in agriculture specifically, a lot of LCAs are done on raw material extraction only. You would then call that cradle to gate approach, and it is meant the gate of the farm. Yeah, such a cradle to gate analysis can look like this. This is taken from a study that analyzed hemp pulp, and the different stages here would be, for example, the agricultural stage on top, plowing, harrowing, fertilizing, then the sowing, growing and development of the plants, which don't really include any emissions. Then, of course, the harvesting, and the post-treatment below is the redding, which, of course, emits again through the decomposition of the dry matter. And the scotching is also an energy-intensive process. Any good or service? Ideally, yes. In hemp, those are many. All these categories here are certainly not covered in LCA literature. It's even that LCA studies in hemp are rather scarce, and at least my feeling is that the industry is much looking for studies that shout out the word that hemp is actually a low impact crop. So most studies focus about the raw materials. There are studies about the textiles to yarn, for example, hemp oil. I have a study also in the example later on, but mostly the goods that LCA studies should focus on are the raw materials at the moment. It also makes studies more comparable, because if we compare, for example, the hemp seeds to other protein seeds, then the LCA has a more purpose, so to say. We can compare and make our decisions better. And if it's a highly manufactured product, like, for example, personal hygiene product that contains hemp seed oil, but also contains, let's say, 10 to 20 other ingredients, then comparing this to other products of the same category is quite difficult. Those comparisons we need, as mentioned, for decision support. Some of those questions, if we stay on the agricultural level, where we need decision support is, for example, which variety to choose. There's some varieties that, of course, are better for dual cropping, maybe need less nitrogen per hectare, also have consequently a lower footprint. Mineral fertilizer or slurry, I mentioned before, the production of the fertilizer is quite greenhouse gas intensive. How much nitrogen per hectare has a huge impact on the eutrophication. Mono or dual cropping is one of those questions. Of course, I could answer that with ideally always dual cropping. Sowing density is also relevant due to the expected yield in the end. And if we yield more on the hectare itself, taken as a functional unit of a study, would consequently have less footprint per kilogram. So key takeaways from LCA in agriculture, specifically with hemp. In agriculture, LCA is structurally, given that field practices and variables change, most often only valid for one growth cycle. I think it's rare that every year is exactly as homogeneous as the previous year. Primary data is key. The level of comprehensiveness is definitely a trade-off between validity and practicability. If we want to make an LCA practical and we want people to find out about their degree of sustainability, it also needs to be easy to use, I want to say. On the other hand, what comes out needs to be valid. So there's no help in creating a very practical tool that in the end reports something we can't use. And since agriculture is about raw material extraction, cradle to gate approach is often chosen, as mentioned before. And finally, LCA is ideally consecutive and gradually improves the assessed goods impact. So in terms of agriculture, it is good to repeat an LCA every year or after every growth cycle and try to improve on those results. I would maybe.
So Nando, one of the questions
so far,
that you mentioned, awesome. One of the topics that you mentioned is one of the questions to ask would be monocropping versus dual cropping. And I've really been an advocate forever, and even more so now, for whole plant use. And I wonder if that's something that you guys have looked at and taken into consideration, even including leaving the roots in the ground and letting that continue to rebuild the soil as it degrades.
Roots in the ground is definitely something for below ground sequestration in terms of carbon farming strategies. I guess this will be answered already later, but I can already tell you there's definitely nothing bad about it. Dual cropping, see it like that, if you account for, we're also talking carbon accounting, right? If 1 hectare of hemp farming has a certain emissions associated, a certain amount of emissions impact whatsoever. And we only harvest seed, then all those emissions and all this impact will be accounted on the seed only. If we harvest seed and straw, then there is an allocation in LCA. So you can usually, depending on the goal of the study, goal definition, step 1, right? You would choose between economic allocation or mass allocation. So if you harvest seed and straw, a mass allocation makes sense, not only because most of the embedded carbon and the uptake, CO2 uptake of hemp is in the straw, in the herd, right? But also because an economic allocation often distorts the actual picture of what we're harvesting. So an economic allocation makes sense for CBD harvesting, because the CBD as a compound in the flower is worth much more than the straw, for example, compared in kilograms. So you would, if you harvest 3 components, it is considerable to talk about an economic allocation of the impacts so that it's equally distributed. But yeah, in terms of dual harvest, one would definitely go for mass allocation of the impacts.
Awesome. And one thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, did that answer your question?
It did very much so. One thing I noticed about, I just want to make a quick comment and then we'll keep going, we'll keep trucking along. I noticed on the image that you shared about, you know, the different streams, the different use streams, is that as I looked and read all of those, they were very realistic. Like they're things that I know people are making, and they're things that I know people are processing into these things. There wasn't anything on here that is far-fetched or that's really far in the future. All of this all of this is very in the process of being created or already in use. So we see, you know, all these uses, and sometimes it gets overwhelming, but I really enjoyed this image. So I wanted to tell you, thank you for sharing this with us. And I'd love to get a copy of this image to share on my social media.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, sure. I had to do that for my master thesis. So it's it's actually made by me. There's no copyright.
All right.
So I can send this out. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Let's get back to that later.
Awesome.
So yeah, any other questions, or I would just continue with the next point on the agenda.
Yeah, so there is some things coming in. They're mostly comments that I would love to address when we get towards the end, but let's keep rolling.
Okay. So examples, I took a deeper look at 3 studies for this meeting that I found of interest. On the left, you can see the word functional units. So every life cycle study has a functional unit that is basically the product system that you're observing. And sorry, the 3 studies that I brought were 1 hectare of fiber hemp. So a functional unit can also be 1 hectare. It doesn't necessarily have to be a material or a product. I've read 1 study, for example, that had functional unit of the consumption of biodiesel. So they were comparing the consumption. So it was when 1 lorry truck was driving in a city traffic of Madrid, I think, for 1 hour constantly, and the consumption of the fuel. And they compared hemp biodiesel against conventional diesel. So even that can be the functional unit, 1 hour drive of a truck. Now in this case, we're going to take a look at 1 hectare fiber hemp, 1 cubic meter food oil, and 1 square meter hemp lime wall, 300 millimeters thick. Yeah, this is a little bit technical, so I'll try to make this short and understandable. So this is a study by French plant scientist Van der Werf from 2004. That is one of the basic studies that was quoted many times. I think more than 100 times on Google Scholar. Is that study on which the the news go back that hemp is a low impact crop. Of course, this has been around before, but this was one of the fundamental studies that highlighted the comparison towards the other crops. On the top, you can see rapeseed, for example, sunflower, maize, wheat. Now on the left side, you can see the inputs that were examined here and how the farming was conducted in comparison to the other crops too. You can see that there is, it's at around the middle of the top table, grain dry meta yield. That's why I was earlier saying dual cropping or monocropping. So this scenario, that was also a French study, and the French traditionally have always been doing fiber hemp. So yeah, there is no grain dry matter yield accounted for in the study. And nonetheless, the impacts are in comparison lower to most of the other crops on 1 hectare of functional unit. At the very bottom, you can see the impact categories. And for example, for climate change, it is still saying that there is an emission that's 2.330 kilogram of CO2 EQ, it's saying, that stands for equivalent. So it accounts for the other greenhouse gases too. So the category climate change is expressed in CO2, but as mentioned before, methane or nitrous oxide also have emission factors so that we can summarize them in CO2 equivalent. Now that this number is positive, so that there is a footprint that is due to the emission of the CO2 uptake. So in this study, the uptake of the hemp crop was not considered because also the other crops don't necessarily have such an uptake. Of course, also other plants sequester and have in their dry matter an uptake. But yeah, it was just omitted in this study. And this is also why looking deeper into these studies is very crucial, and critically reflecting them, as mentioned before, so that we can put into perspective what we're actually looking at. Yeah. However, the study asserted that hemp is a low impact crop in comparison to all these other crops. There is a sources slide in the very end, should you be interested to check that up yourself later on. Now, a rather recent study, actually from last year, is from Czech Republic, and this is a study that did not assert such a good impact of hemp food oil. Now, if we look at these graphs here, for example, the impact category freshwater ecotoxicity, the green bar that is hemp oil. So the impact, high impact in this case, is not, it's something bad. It's not that it's as much as higher as the number is, the better the impact. It's bad impact in this particular case. For example, we can also check at the very bottom, climate change is still very fine. Sunflower is also said to be a very climate efficient crop, so it makes perfect sense that those are in the similar category. But yeah, this is a study that critically reviews hemp oil and does not really assert a good impact, as mentioned. Now, looking deeper into this makes exactly sense, because then we will see on the top right here, I highlighted the yields, the outputs that were accounted for in this study. And they had a seed yield output of 500 kilograms and a straw output of 9,000 kilograms. So it is likely to assume that this was a fiber genetic and not a food genetic, so probably not a phenola. We had in our test trials in Lower Saxony a similar yield, and that was a Futura 75 that you would probably not use for hemp oil production. Now, the data that they took in the study is still fine. It was conducted according to all the standards and everything. Just the data taken was not really practical. They just used that from the Czech agricultural standards database, I think. Now, I'm not so familiar with that database, but from the looks of it, I can tell already that this database might not distinguish between hemp for food or hemp for fiber. The different uses of hemp probably not covered. Yeah, so primary data at this point, I want to say is very crucial in an agricultural LCA, because if we take globalized data, for example, from a census database from a whole country, or even Food and Agricultural Organization data, the data is really not granular, and with an LCA, we want to have true results, is what I said before, practicability versus validity. In this case, yeah, it's could be more valid in terms of primary data. Yeah, also at the bottom, you can see that there is, it's saying, second sentence, from the cradle to farm gate approach. So in this study also, it was not the production and the press, the manufacturing was not considered. It's only about the farm gate. Yeah. And then we have the wall study, hemp lime wall in the UK. On top, in the top table, you can see that this study only used the fuel consumption of associated processes in agriculture. So it's a study that considers only the greenhouse gas impact category and not the other impact categories. Now, exactly because of that, they also accounted for the absorption and the sequestration. You can see in the bottom middle that they asserted net GHG emissions of minus 36, which is, in this case, the minus is something good. There's a little language twist always. So if something is carbon negative, it's actually not negative, right? It's something positive that it is carbon negative. So if we have negative emissions, that's good. It means it's sequestering. So if we take a deeper look on the left, on the inputs lower table, there's first lime binder and then hemp sheaf. So the hemp sheaf, if we then on that line go to the very right in the category absorption, sequestration, there's an amount of kilogram of CO2 embedded in the hemp sheaf per kilogram, and the percentage of that lime wall that the hemp sheaf well sort of sequesters. So here we can see that in one hemp lime wall of 1 square meter and 300 millimeter thickness, 55.4% of the embedded carbon comes from the hemp sheaf. And in the end, we can assert negative greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if they would have put the other impact categories into the assessment, I am pretty sure that this value of minus 36 kilograms would be a little bit worse in terms of, so it would go up a little bit closer to zero, but nonetheless probably still be negative. On top of that, this is also, I think, not the usage phase of the LCA included. So there's a calcination process with hemp lime walls, and they sequester over time, right? And this is also not necessarily accounted for, assuming that it was not in the goal definition of the study. Yeah, so far so good for some examples. Awesome. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so we've got a few questions that came in, and I will go back through as we talk and try to make sure we address all the questions at the end as much as I can, but this will also be transcribed and recorded and available on Hemp Hallway for people afterwards. If you want to go back, all of this chat transcription, everything will be available for review, and we'll make sure you get a copy of it too. But a question that was asked was, are the yields for those calculations on a dry basis?
Yes,
yeah, they are.
I'm pretty sure. From which particular study was that? I can check.
I think it was the second study that question came in on.
Second study, yeah.
I believe so.
I'm it's not saying here, actually. That is a fair point, but I am pretty sure it's dry matter yield. It's in all studies I've read so far, they use dry matter yield. So yeah, but good question. I would have to look that up to give 100% clear statement about it.
No worries, no worries. And another thing that was brought up, and maybe this is better suited towards the end, but I'll bring it up just in case, and you can be the judge, was including the land use change in the LCA, and that they didn't see the land use change accounted for. And so I'd like for you to comment on that if you think it's appropriate at this time.
Yeah, I think in these 3 studies that I just mentioned, land use change was not accounted for, no, under the assumption that this was farmland or cropland before. So land use change would only be included in the LCA if the land was indeed changed for the purpose of whatever was conducted. So let's say I don't know, I'm landowner, I have a farm, I have a forest, and I'm burning down a hectare of forest to plant hemp there. Then this land use change definitely has to be accounted for in the LCA of that hectare of freshly grown hemp after one growth cycle. If I am using cropland that has been cropland just before, then there is no land use change.
Interesting. Okay, I think that answered that question. If not, they'll let us know, and we'll give them an opportunity to clarify. But yeah, I think that was, I love when you can bring data into it, and even poke holes in the data, you know, being like, hey, I don't think they did this right. Here's where I see a flaw, because that gives us the opportunity as researchers, as you know, we have many scientists, doctors, amazing people, farmers. It gives us the opportunity to see the flaw and realize how we can do it better, so that we can put real data forward. So that was a really exciting section for me. I'm a little bit of a data nerd, so I appreciate that, and I'm excited to go in next. Looks like we got carbon farming strategies with hemp.
Yes. So I'm trying to scratch the surface of carbon farming and how hemp is relevant in it, and what is in general, where hemp is not different from other crops too. So there's 4 points I considered important to talk about. First of all, the slide is I think just great to show that also companies like McKinsey are after calculations for how valuable, or no, not valuable, sorry, what the value of those markets is going to be. That is a pretty rough estimation, also 5 to 5 billion, pretty broad. But yeah, one thing that this graph shows, that's the blue part of the graph. It's saying negative emissions required for a 1.5 degrees pathway. So yeah, actually that is already starting soon, that we really need to sequester carbon actively. And it's not only about the reduction, it's not enough. We need to remove carbon from the air and store it in long term, 100 years plus, ideally 1,000 years. And hemp is, of course, a magnificent crop for that in many perspectives. Yeah, so directly associated to agriculture are 2.2 gigatons of carbon removal that we need by 2030, quite a big number. And hotspots are a very interesting instrument to understand the footprint of the own farming operation. So here is, I have to read that out loud. Actually, I just have to move my camera here. So it's saying that the processes that contribute more than 10% to impact categories or flows. Here is saying in the hemp fiber system, fiber hemp system, that's a study that compared non-wood pulp from flax versus hemp. That's why it's saying in the hemp fiber system here. However, taking a closer look at these hotspots here, we can see that first category, fertilizers use, that is the impact category of global warming potential, and that accounts for 36.2%. The main contributor is the nitrous oxide, yeah, with 98.8%. pretty heavy. Now, fertilizer use, we're using it anyway, right? I guess how this can be reduced is only to reduce the fertilizer, but then again, we need fertilizer to grow the crop, except for there's a lot of nutrients left from the previous crop. Then a reduction might be sensible. But what this is more about is that the second one is saying ammonium nitrate production. So this is really about the mineral fertilizer production. In the top category, fertilizer use, there's not a huge difference between, for example, the pig slurry or the mineral fertilizers in terms of usage, but in terms of production, there is a big difference. Now, the production of both ammonium nitrate or triple superphosphate causes a lot of emissions. Those are chemical factories that are not that far, that they work with negative emission technologies like carbon capture, bioenergy carbon capture storage, or something. So yeah, a lot of emissions associated to the production of fertilizers. And in the bottom category, scotching, we can see there's actually the main contributor, uranium. So one might wonder, what is uranium doing here? But the underlying assumption in this study is the energy mix. So in terms of scope 3 emissions, these are also the emissions associated to energy usage. That's the impact category EU. That's exactly energy usage. 17% of the scotching process, because of uranium. So it is also wise to use renewable energies, which will then have less emissions in the process, and also less emissions that can be accounted to a functional unit. In this case, the functional unit was 1 ton of hemp fiber. So if the scotching process was used with electricity from nuclear power, then of course this emission is accounted in the functional unit of 1 ton of hemp fiber. So these are hotspots, also important for the decision making, important for the consecutive nature of LCA to every year, every growth cycle, so to say, try to improve on that footprint by hotspot analysis. And then sensitivity analysis is the other important tool that is being used for the scenario analysis. So this is how strategies can be built. That's why it's an important part of strategy building in carbon farming. Having scenarios, going through scenarios by sensitivity analysis. I think there are a few tools, meanwhile, that offer that too. Problem so far with the life cycle assessment software is it's just really, really expensive. Licenses usually cost several thousands of euros. But yeah, should anybody want to conduct a life cycle study with their operation, sensitivity analysis is definitely a crucial instrument. Why so? I'm going to explain now. Here we see 4 scenarios from left to right. Is just a reduction of the mineral fertilizer into compost. So scenario on the right is using mostly compost. Scenario on the left is mostly using mineral fertilizer. And here we can see the different footprints too, and the different energy footprints. On the top, the carbon footprint. On the bottom, the energy footprint. So the scenario number 3 has the lowest footprints. Here also energy footprint, because the production of those fertilizers requires a lot of energy too. And if there is an underlying assumption of an energy mix and not entirely renewables, then of course there's the uranium again. In terms of carbon footprint, what's very interesting here is also that they accounted for the CO2 uptake. That is a study done by Italian scientists from 2020. Actually, they had pretty solid data from the French Interchanvre Association, which was also primary data from, I think, 30+ farmers. So not only one farm, but taken into account several farmers, which is great because sample size of 30 and higher always tells us that it's more valid what comes out. Here we can see that their LCA came to the result that the functional unit here was 1 kilogram of herd, and it's carbon negative even if you deduct all the emissions and you balance the CO2 uptake. Now below ground sequestration is something where general principles of regenerative agriculture apply. Those are pretty easily summarized. I mean, of course, there's more depth into the whole topic, but I'm trying to cut it short. Reduce tillage, of course. Deep tillage is really bad for the soil and destroys microbiological life. No synthetics, ideally. The good old manure or slurry is well enough. Crop rotation is very, very important, increasing the biodiversity and the resilience of the soil. Catch crops also to avoid the irrigation in winter, and the use of biochar, a new method or practically renaissance of that method. Apparently the Maya have already done that 1,000 years ago, a little bit similar like with hemp. Now, question is, how do we measure that? Because carbon farming can be pretty much split in below ground sequestration and above ground sequestration. Below ground sequestration is pretty difficult to measure. There are satellites or startups that work with models to evaluate satellite pictures. There's of course field sensors. There are drones and laboratory analysis. What we figured out is that a combination of all of them is the best to get the most valid results. But that's of course also very expensive, and there's lots of efforts behind it. Now, we tried ourselves. We wanted to know, at the bottom you can see a mobile measurement device that was using infrared sensors. We tried that on the organic hemp field where we were doing tests in Lower Saxony. That's unfortunately in German, but the relevant thing is at the bottom, CO2. Now, this software that was provided in this tool to spit out a CO2 value. So apparently in those 5 hectares here on the top left, you can see the points where we measured that there were 2,455 tons of CO2 embedded in the soil. But when you dig deeper, you realize that these are all mathematical models. And there is almost no company that is using this kind of technology that has like a really 100% accuracy. That's pretty impossible. So it's always an estimation, and there are definitely errors behind that. Now, if you get into that topic a little bit more and you realize the challenges, that's probably how you're going to feel. That's at least how we felt when we realized below ground sequestration and the magnitude of this. That's why we shifted to above ground sequestration, as in hemp, there is great potential in the straw. And just as the study before said, there's a solid CO2 uptake in the straw, in the herd already.
While we're talking about sequestration really quick, we had a couple of quick questions come in that I think are relevant real quick. So George asked, what CDMs are you using to determine your sequestration?
Can you elaborate CDN? There's many abbreviations, just so that I precisely know what you mean by CDN.
And then the next question while he's typing that was, did you use eddy covariance to measure CO2 profile in hemp?
No.
Okay, awesome. So, and those are two, when we get to the end here, if we're being respectful of your time, if we have another minute, we can give them a chance to just talk one-on-one, jump on camera and say, and maybe we can figure it out together.
Sure, we brought time. It's
all right, so CDM was clean development mechanism.
And the question again was?
Which did you use? What CDMs are you using to determine your sequestration? What clean development mechanisms are you using to determine your sequestration?
Now, admittedly, we did not get any further in the below ground sequestration. I will talk about that more right after in the next chapter about carbon credits too. Our focus really lies on the above ground sequestration, and the reasons are mostly that the compliance markets of states are pretty much setting the rules for those. Just the EU paper is 150 pages, and this is just the first paper on below ground sequestration. So we thought as a young startup with limited resources, we better don't bother and focus on something that we can grasp better and where we can put in our energy more efficiently to move more and get higher impact results quicker. Because the really big questions will be answered on a compliance level.
Awesome. All right, let's keep going because we're really in some cool information right now.
All right, so in terms of above ground sequestration, this is the same graph from before, from the study from that used French association data. Continuing from the question, we just figured the case of above ground sequestration with hemp is much more clear. It's much easier to grasp because we have X amount of biomass that has Y amount of carbon. And if we can manage to sequester that in the long term, then we have a win. And we took CO2 out of the air into the plant. And if ideally the whole farming operation has excess carbon, so to say a carbon budget, we think that's where the music plays. So in this particular example, this operation of hemp herd production resulted in 1 kilogram of hemp herd being minus 0.5, so it's like half a kilo CO2 sequestered after net. So here's the calculation to that per hectare. They had a dry matter yield indeed of 9 tons too. So dry, they had after the decortication in all processes involved, just the herd were 4.4 tons per hectare, and that had then a gross sequestration of 5.6 tons CO2 per hectare, and net deducting the emissions upstream. So cradle to gate in that sense, assuming that the processing happened on the farm too, was a net of 2.4 tons CO2 per hectare, which is, I know that there are numbers out there that hemp has much higher volumes of CO2 sequestration. Now, this particular number is really only associated with the herd. This is only what they, according to the study, and admittedly from all studies that I've read, this was a pretty solid one, especially because they also had the associations data, also how they conducted it was pretty solid. So this is only the herd. There's, of course, all the other ways how to sequester CO2 in the below ground, for example, the other low impact of hemp on the farm, and also the soil health increase through hemp farming, etc., not accounted for in this particular number. It's only the herd. So key takeaways from carbon farming strategies. Carbon farming implies to identify hotspots and minimize avoidable emissions first. And then you would see how you increase the sequestration, for example, crop yield whatsoever. But before you would try to increase your crop yield and have more straw in your harvest, harvest more straw, through, for example, increasing the nitrogen per hectare through mineral fertilizer, you would rather want to try to get the same yield with pig slurry or other organic slurry and stop using the mineral fertilizer. So first hotspots and avoid emissions first. Carbon farming is a long process that requires analysis, planning, scenarios, and a holistic strategy. And especially the below ground sequestration programs that are, for example, soon anticipated by the EU. There's also a program that's coming from the US Department of Agriculture. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, they're just now launching an application period. At least I found a link that I'm happy to share right after. And that's exactly why the governmental bodies are already involved in this. It's a pretty tough process long-term that requires much discipline too, because if soil health is regenerated again, then it can be destroyed in the matter of 1-2 growth cycles again. Above ground sequestration is technologically much easier yet than below ground sequestration, the reasons I explained. And below ground sequestration is, though, ecologically much more significant due to the soil health effects. Soon coming to the last chapter, maybe there's any other question in between, or?
For some reason, I can't get my chat open. I can see that there's a couple of questions that came in, but I'm unable to get it. I'm unable to get it open. It'll pop up, but it won't open for me. So unfortunately, I think there were some questions. I'll play with it while we get into this next section, or after the presentation, maybe we can pop over there together. And
definitely. At this point, I can only say I really, really want to answer all questions, and whatever I hope I can answer. I'm also, I'm not a professor, so probably I can't answer every particular detail, but hopefully I can. And even if I couldn't answer it right away, I'm happy to note it down and get back to you, because it's an important topic. We want to push forward the sustainability image also of this industry, and also, of course, the impact of everything. So yes, if something wasn't answered yet, please ask again. Contact will be in the end too. And
we do, this is meant to be a two-way street. That's exactly what it is. So if you learn something while you're here, and our attendees learn something too, we won today, so let's ask each other the hard questions, and there's no shame in not knowing something at all.
Absolutely not.
So thank you so much for being open and being willing to take that. So here, when we finish the Slack section, I'll have you open the chat and we'll go through and pick out a couple questions and we'll open it up.
That sounds very good.
Awesome.
Cool. Then I'll proceed with the last chapter, hemp and carbon credits. Of course, very interesting additional economic incentive, hopefully for everybody, for every pharma in the near future. As mentioned before, there's compliance markets and voluntary markets. Compliance markets, as far as I understand, more focusing on below ground sequestration. Those are real soil health strategies. Soil as one of the big carbon sinks on our earth. Don't know if all of you guys watched that movie, but very recommendable. Kiss the Ground, can just really recommend. It's explaining well why everything's so important. So in compliance in the EU, I also mentioned before, the European Commission put out a program already, US Department of Agriculture. I'm going to share that link to what I found on that. Of course, us sitting in Germany, we focus more on the whole European Union aspects, but the voluntary markets, which we also with our business focus on much more. Those are names like Gold Standard or Vera. We also have national companies, startups in Europe. There's a Puro Earth in Finland, or Carbon Future in Germany. All work out their own standards. So the voluntary markets pretty much have their own ideas of how these carbon credits should be standardized. For example, Vera recently rolled out a biochar standard, and Gold Standard also has projects with baseline scenarios like cooking stove in Africa, where they try to improve status quo, a baseline scenario that is always called, with a new approach. So these kind of voluntary credits happen with what is the new project changing in comparison to a baseline scenario. This is also greenhouse gas protocol standard, that you start with the baseline scenario. Now, with hemp, there's two options how to approach this. I mentioned before slightly, It depends on the case, whether you have a primary straw case, you farm for straw or fiber or herd, depending on what is being produced, likely building material maybe, or if the primary is seed and the straw is a byproduct, some say waste. I don't like that because it's, of course, it's not really waste, but yeah, according to the terminology, yeah, it is considered a waste product if it would just remain on the field and emit all the carbon sequestered again through decomposition. Or also in the case of mulching, but more to that after. So I'll go through two cases, two examples also here. First, a potential case for building material. So if we're assuming that there is hemp straw as a primary good, of course, that requires a baseline scenario and an LCA, because it is only one good that we're looking at. It's not that we're using a waste stream or something, as mentioned before, or any byproduct. So in this particular case of a building material, a hemp block for construction that is being produced from hemp herd, I used the example of the study before. So there's, of course, a raw material extraction that emits greenhouse gases. Before we had the carbon footprint of that study with the CO2 uptake. So there is sort of a carbon budget to stay in. If that whole product should stay carbon neutral, then the manufacturing is emitting, and of course the distribution, depending on how far that is being distributed. And in the end, hopefully that product has still a negative footprint. And that would be the baseline scenario. No, that would be the LCA. Now, the baseline scenario, I don't really have in these calculations. What you can see down there, value per hectare, is really just the production of the good and the LCA. So the value of the embedded carbon in the product itself. So I'm assuming that the values from the previous study are valid for such a production, so that the herd is being pressed into the block. So we would have per hectare still gross the 5.6 tons of CO2. And then after the emissions deducted from the manufacturing and distributions, this is a hypothetical calculation, assuming that there's 1.3 tons net CO2 sequestration per hectare in hemp blocks. And that would be currently on voluntary markets a value of $40 US. Of course, this is, again, hypothetical. Yeah, don't nail me down on it. There's also the baseline scenario to compare this to. So in the use phase of such a hemp block, you would also have CO2 potential, and this can also be accounted for. Yeah, that's more to that in a key takeaway later.
I just saw a question pop up, so before it disappears,
of course.
so I can open the chat. What is the carbon content of the herd in these hypothetical calculations?
The carbon content in the herd, that is a very good question. I think it is about 40 to 45% what they were assuming. But please also don't nail me down on that. I am actually working on a little literature overview of sequestration potential of hemp dry biomass, pretty much the herd and straw. So stay tuned over the next weeks. There might be a little report.
Awesome.
But yeah, there was a section in the paper where they explained how they calculate the uptake.
And you said you have your references. There's a reference page at the
end. Reference coming awesome. Right in the end, that Great. You can all screenshot and okay.
Have our way with. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Coming to biochar, which is our area of expertise. Where Tim is not only researching a lot at the moment, but also technologically, we're finding the pathways how to have a concept at scale with hemp and biochar in a circular way. So these were tests we've done with one of the leading biochar manufacturers in Germany. And we also used the herd and the straw actually, made 2 different tests to pyrolyze it into biochar. And the conversion rate was roughly 30%. So the biochar itself has 70% pure carbon. And at the bottom right, you can see an EBC sign. That is the certificate standard we use in Europe. In the US, there is the IBI biochar certificate standard, if I'm not mistaken. So those standards are important to consider because those standards, again, function for the marketplaces. Now, pyrolysis is pretty complex. You can't just pyrolyze hemp hurt with any machine or pyrolysis factory, so to say. Technologically, there are a lot of different individual characteristics of those facilities to account for, so that in the end there comes out a homogeneous biochar that can be applied with the highest grade as well. The biochar that we tested is actually eligible as feed, so could be fed to cows, could be made into carbon tablets or something for human consumption, or as additive for any fertilizer. So the stream looks a bit different than with the primary usage, because we farm primarily for seed. The straw is considered waste. So the underlying assumption in this scenario is that we're actually doing something good by taking the straw from the field and doing something with it that renders the carbon stable, so that we can put it into something where it stays forever, ideally, or at least more than 100 years or 1,000 years. In this case, so we have a utilization of waste and no footprint needs to be put on the straw. So in terms of carbon accounting, all the carbon is accounted in the seed, because the agricultural practices were all done for food production. So all the emissions associated are accounted at the seed. The straw then is being manufactured through the pyrolysis. Tiny picture there of the machine that we conducted our pyrolysis with. And pyrolysis is really a magnificent process, because it also generates a lot of energy. So there's an extra, if you run it all the time for 1 year, there's an extra 5,250,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's roughly 190 households of energy. Yeah, then of course the biochar that comes out, the product is being distributed ideally to a farm or well, an agricultural outlet where a farmer can buy that biochar and then apply it in the soil. The magnificent thing about this is versus, for example, the building material, nobody's going to dig the carbon out of the soil again. Once it's in the soil, it's there. You can also add nutrients to the biochar so that you have a regeneration process. I think there was a meeting about biochar here 2-3 months ago. So assuming that I don't need to dig deeper into the effects of biochar on soil health and so on.
Correct. And if anybody's looking for that, if you want info on biochar, you can go to hemphallway.com, log in. If you're not a member, you will have to request access. You get a 72-hour trial period without being a member, but you can go in there and search the word biochar and find any meetings we've had that have been around that topic. So if you missed the biochar meeting, as Nando said, it's there for you to check out. So you don't need to elaborate. Let's keep going.
Perfect. I can only say that in Europe, fortunately, we have a quite advanced biochar industry, not advanced in terms of market volume, but advanced in terms of technology. So we have great machines here that hopefully also go all around the world very soon. Anyway, the value per year in this case, not per hectare. It was difficult to compare those cases. But yeah, in this case, value per year, because the biochar machine, the pyrolysis machine runs all year long, ideally, as you often want it in any manufacturing. So here we calculated 2,200 tons of hemp straw, 5 tons per hectare, which is still a yield that can be assumed even in a food crop scenario, 440 hectares resulting from that. And that would make 1,850 tons of CO2 sequestered in the form of biochar. And the certificates for hemp biochar currently on voluntary marketplaces trade 120 euros and more. So those are by far the most expensive carbon credits, which is due to the safe and stable methodology. It's a pretty easy pitch. There is organic material with X amount of carbon embedded. It's being pyrolyzed. After that, it's being analyzed. The analysis says there's so much carbon in it. You put it in the ground, and that's pretty much it. So carbon converts 3.67 times to CO2, and 1 ton of CO2 is considered 1 CO2 removal certificate, in short, cork. So yeah, one of these machines creates 1,850 corks per year at a value of additional $250,000 roughly. Now there's a so-called cascade usage. This would increase if one of these things would be done with those certificates, or I mean, let's say in the scenario with biochar application, the biochar can be added to fertilizer, can be fed to cows. So talking again about a baseline scenario, let's say a farm with cattle, farms hemp, brings that to biochar facility, gets back the biochar, brings the hemp straw there, is what I'm saying, gets back the biochar, is best grade, feedable to the cattle, feeds it to the cow. Cow farts less, emits less methane, and that is in comparison to the baseline scenario better, right? So also then the carbon is in the manure, and if that is again being used as fertilizer or being put into the biogas facility made to substrate altogether, the carbon eventually, when it's being put out on the field as fertilizer, goes to the ground again. So in such a scenario, the carbon credit can be sold for even higher value, 140, 150 euros per cork, because there are co-benefits attached and more emissions can be sequestered in the circular usage. Key takeaways in this chapter are that the credit value strongly depends on the baseline scenario, as just explained. Almost every credit is an individual project that requires individual assessment. So be that straw for primary production definitely requires an LCA, or be that biochar, also the application of the biochar. It is necessary to know how it's being used, and that needs to be assessed. Also, marketplaces have tough standards there. Different marketplaces have different requirements. And ideally food first, then materials. So yeah, I'm not saying that one or the other is so much better. It's just ideally we of course need to feed the world too. So for example, biochar industry doesn't want to have renewable resources to be grown just for pyrolysis. There is enough waste material around, and also hemp is a crop that yields both. Of course, there are productions and businesses that focus on fiber or straw mainly, and then biochar is probably not a good case to obtain credits, but rather building materials or other products that this is being produced into. Very short outlook, what we're doing. In the end, there is a 4M framework that we figured. It is measure footprints, mitigate emissions, monetize CO2 budget, and manage the communication of this, of course. So the three latter are forthcoming. Currently, we're working a lot on measuring the footprints, as hopefully you could see throughout this presentation. And we'd like to encourage you to sign up also on our website for a GHG greenhouse gas calculator that we're working on. That is probably coming out in Q2 this year, where we will try to synthesize all the difficulties that I just mentioned, into a system that is valid enough to promote and at the same time practical enough. I can't promise on the technology behind this yet. It might be that we start with easy questionnaires, but I can vouch for that once this goes online, the calculations behind this will be according to international standards like IPCC, etc. And hopefully give us a good grasp of hemp operations and a first start in the whole area of standardized LCA and low footprint, low impact farming practices in this industry. For any other projects, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to see what we can do and how we can get into a project, answer your questions whatsoever, and consult if there's a bigger project at hand. The sources that I use in this presentation, feel free to screenshot this. Most of this you can find through Google Scholar, or one of the pictures. There's a link behind this too. Not sure if all of these are free access, but maybe you know somebody who knows how to get that. At least often through ResearchGate or something, the authors are also keen to provide the studies for free, earlier versions of those at least.
Well, thank you so much. That was just so informational, and it also brought up a lot of questions, and now I'm able to go back and kind of peek at a couple of them here. One that just came in a few moments ago is Bill asked, thanks for being a member, Bill, is the off gas from the reactor captured or flared?
I think that's my part right now. So I already read a few of those questions. I'm only speaking EU standards because, to be honest, I'm quite not sure how it's like in the IBI standards in the US, but in the EU standard, if you want an EBC certificate and you want to trade a carbon credit, you have to capture the pyrolysis gas and it can't emit. Otherwise, you won't be even able to get the certificate down. And yeah, the other question I've seen there already is what they are doing with the gases. I talked to a lot of pyrolysis companies, mainly focusing on the CO2 certificate generation. A lot of them have no use for them. I think pyrolysis gas is very useful in the chemical industry. But to be honest, I'm still scanning the market. There are a lot of companies coming out of the ground here in Germany, and it's pretty hard to scan all of it. And we have a lot of technical difficulties with hemp, like always. I think everybody here knows the problems we have with the hemp straw. All the machines will stop when you put hemp straw in it, and no one's prepared for that. So we have a few problems in the whole pyrolysis system as well, and we have to make sure how to work them out. But yeah, you have to capture the pyrolysis gas because otherwise you won't be even able to create a credit.
This industry turns us all into problem solvers very quickly, that's for sure. That's no doubt about it. Another question that came in earlier is, should not you be using your byproduct and your LCA to offset any carbon positive feedback?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, shouldn't you be using your byproduct and your LCA to offset any carbon positive feedback? So there was a part of the presentation where so, you get it.
I think I get it. Yeah, assuming that all the carbon is accounted in the seed, and that is of course a question of the producer. I mean, let's assume you're a big enough hemp farming operation that you produce for food, hemp seed. and you can put such a facility on your farm, it's kind of up to you whether you want to promote that you have a carbon neutral seed or seed oil ideally, because that will then of course be deducted off the value that you could make on a voluntary market. So I mean, to answer that, yeah, of course it should. I'm absolutely pro, but that is up to the individual scenario. So yeah, ecology versus economy.
Yeah, definitely. Tim, did you see any other questions that were in that chat that you wanted to address?
I just see another question I can't even answer, but I'm quite happy that someone brought it up because now I can read myself into it. It's about the whole gas progress behind the pyrolysis, because in a lot of in the cases we work, the pyrolysis plants we work with, a lot of them, they don't have them or have the pyrolysis gas in their business model, so they don't really care about it. But it might be a very interesting idea, and I just copied the comment. So it was just like gas Fischer Tropsch to white diesel. I think it's some I already Googled it, but yeah, I can't comment on this, to be honest, because yeah.
I'm reading a question if the energy balance of pyrolysis is net plus or negative. Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's net plus. So the process generates more energy than it takes.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's depending on, I think it's some kind of certification you need. I'm not sure if every pyrolysis plant has this certification
machine,
set up,
yeah.
But it should be possible, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And I do want to be respectful of you guys' time. I know we've gone almost a half hour over already. I'm so grateful for you letting me jump in and ask questions. So if at any point, if either one of you need to go, just be like, hey, I've got to get out of here.
It's perfectly fine. It's late here, but we have a beer already. So
all right, now we're here. It's 2:30 in the afternoon here. I think it might be a little early. Did we have any other questions that weren't in the chat or that weren't addressed? Feel free to raise your hand. Now's your opportunity to ask these guys a question. And my little one just decided that he's done with this. So give me a second. I'm going to mute myself. Joanne, if there's anybody that raises their hand, please feel free to make sure they get called on. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so any questions? Alrighty.
I do see, so he got happy for a second, right when I went to go get him. One of the, it was just a comment that biomass to biochar electrical generation is considered renewable and is a carbon offset project. Is that, have you guys heard that before?
I heard about the possibilities to also use the whole process for electrical generation. That's also a big point. I talked to a company here. I think they are sitting in Finland as well. Yeah, it's always dependent on what you want to do with the pyrolysis. There's so many end usage for biochar, and it's all depending on this whole process. So we are currently not focusing on it, but I already heard about it. Yeah, it's definitely possible, and it's also an approach to really focus on the whole electrical generation through the pyrolysis, and it might be a good approach as well. Yeah, we always have to see what we're able to achieve in like 24 hours a day. So, but it's a very good hint, and I think it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's it. I think I got most of the questions answered. There's some, I can't scroll up past like 2:14 p.m. So if there's anybody I missed, my apologies. We'll drop you guys. Are you both on LinkedIn? How can people get a hold of you? LinkedIn, email, what's the best way? I saw your contact information on that slide.
Yeah, let me quickly, I actually prepared a short list of links that I wanted to put in here, but of course I forgot to post them. So give me a second. First of all, of course, our website. I'll put that in the chat here. Here you go. So there's also on the About Us section, there is a very brief contact form where you can also shoot us a message that's linked to Slack. So those notifications only stop if I'm sleeping from midnight to 8 in the morning. other than that, we're always available. We read it and we'll get back to you at least within a week. And for anybody interested in what there's our emails too. Besides I said that there was about below ground sequestration USDA announcement that I just wanted to share because you guys on the US, of course, that's what I found from the USDA Farm Service Agency might be relevant. Admittedly, I didn't dig too deep into it, but I thought it might be relevant, and anybody who wants to get into that. And if anybody is keen on signing up for our calculator, of course, there's also here a type form to sign up for that. And
thank you. And I do just want to make mention again, these notes will all be transcribed. This entire meeting will be transcribed and uploaded onto Hemp Hallway. So if anybody is like, oh man, what was that link? Give us about 48 hours. And then you can log into Hemp Hallway, go search. You can search Nando's name. You can search carbon, or you could just look at recents, and this will be there available for you to view.
Yeah, we're also on LinkedIn. So yeah, any upcoming questions also feel free to reach out. We will do our best to answer them.
Awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Joanne for a second. She's got a couple of closing comments, but I want to thank you guys so much for staying over with us, for so much wonderful information, for letting us ask some tough questions, and we can continue to learn and grow together. So I look forward to seeing you around in our GHA network a lot more here at Global Hemp Association. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm gonna let Joanne take over.
Awesome. Well, another thank you to Nando and Tim for your presentation today, and thank you for everybody who has joined us, especially our members. We're really grateful for you. And as Kayla's mentioned, we have Hemp Hallway. So if you're looking to connect with others after this event, you're welcome to join Hemp Hallway. As Kayla mentioned, there's a 72-hour trial period, but it does require membership, but you can access, over 400 hours of content that Mandy's produced, and now Kayla as well. And you can search others in the network too. So again, a big thank you to everybody for joining. If you're interested in membership or are a member, want to discuss things and maximizing benefits, feel free to reach out. We're here for you.
Thanks so much, Nando. Tim, any final words before we sign off?
Yeah, well, of course, just giving back the thanks to everyone for listening. Tough questions, always good. We also want to improve. And thanks for the attention and the interest in everything.
And if there's anything you guys need from our network, feel free to utilize us. Reach out if you have a need, if you're looking for a scientist or a doctor, or you're looking for a specific contact, by coming into this network, you become family. So utilize us as a resource. We love you guys. Thank you so much.
We'll be around. And although we sit in Europe and this is our first focus, the day will come that we'll come to the other side of the Atlantic, and then yeah.
If not, we'll just have to come see you, one way or the other. It's a two-way ocean.
Anytime. Reach out if you're in Europe.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Tim. Talk soon.
Then
have a nice
day,
day,
everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
See you soon.